been activated.
Ok, entonces para acceder a la función desde su computadora, busque el globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla y elija interpretación de idiomas. Luego, seleccione su canal de idiomas.
To access the function from your computer, find the globe on the bottom of your screen and choose language interpretation. Then select your language channel.
Y si se une a esta reunión desde su teléfono o tableta, busque los 3 puntos en la parte inferior de su pantalla y toque más. Luego toque interpretación de idiomas, seleccione su canal de idiomas y toque finalizar. Y es este último paso el que en sí activa la función.
To access the function from your phone or your tablet, find the 3 dots on the bottom of your screen and select More, then Language Interpretation. Select your language channel and click Done. This last step is what activates the function.
Ok, y si tiene alguna dificultad accediendo a la función de interpretación, por favor, déjenos saber, mándele un mensaje por chat a Leslie para ayudarle.
If you are having any issues with accessing the interpretation function, please send a chat message to Leslie and they will support in resolving any issues.
Ok, ahora vamos a hacer una prueba en el canal de español. Vamos a asegurarnos que nuestros compas en el canal de inglés pueden escuchar a Joel interpretando. Por favor, háganos un señal.
Hearing us in English, let us know. Give us a little dance or a hello if all is well on the English channel. Great. Now I'm going to switch over to English to check the Spanish channel.
Make sure that the Spanish channel is good to go. Leslie, I see your thumbs up. Thank you so much. We will continue the rest of our introduction and affirmation en español. ¿Verdad? Sabemos que crear espacios multilingües es un
And
esfuerzo.
so we know creating a multilingual space is a collective effort. And we know that we do this, and it's even more important in agricultural spaces, where we know that the majority of folks that sustain our food system speak many languages. In these times, we interpret today between multiple Englishes and Spanishes, and we recognize that we bring many more languages into this space. And so we invite you to put in this chat all the languages that are present in this space to name, honor, and recognize our communities and the fact that they are multilingual. So if you can take a moment and just share that in the chat. And now I'm going to share some of the ways in which we can all support our commitment to language justice during this meeting. And first and foremost, please say your name before speaking. We know that people are listening to the interpretation, sometimes are only hearing the voice of the person who is interpreting and can't always tell when the speaker changes. Right, and we also want you to know that your comments in the chat will be translated by Michelle and Christian. And if you can, please write your comments in English and Spanish so we can all easily access them. And if, we also refer you to depot.com to be able to self-translate. But if not, do not worry. Please make your comments in the language you prefer. And that's why we're here. And we please add your gender pronouns to your name. And every once in a while, we will need to communicate with the person who is speaking. And to not interrupt folks, we use different signals. Some of you already know some of these signs, so please do them with us. The first sign is this one right here for slower. If you see us doing this, you already know what it means. And this one is speak up, loud and clear. This is the hand signal for that. This is one speaker at a time, just in case we get excited. This is one mic because we can only interpret one person at a time. And this is if we need you to be able to ask for some clarification. You'll see us make that sign. And so there's also this invitation to repeatedly mute your mic if you're not speaking. And lastly, for the people who are interpreting or listening to the interpretation in Spanish, you will see that we use the gender inclusivity in Spanish. We use the E instead of O or A to be reflective of gender inclusivity. And this is not a pronunciation error, but an intentional decision to recognize the expansiveness of gender that exists within our communities. And again, anything that comes up with interpretation, please let us know. Leslie will be on it. And thank you once again for your commitment to language justice. And we'll give back the mic to Aley.
Thank you very much. Leslie, I actually want to turn it over to you quickly for a couple of housekeeping pieces.
Hola a todos, habla Leslie Rodríguez, bienvenida.
Hello, everyone. This is Leslie Rodriguez. Welcome and thank you for being here this afternoon. And I ask that if you can, please rename yourselves so that we can use the breakout rooms during this meeting. And I'm going to put some instructions in the chat. And if you have any questions about renaming yourselves, please write to me privately in the chat and I'll be able to help. We're doing this effort so that we can have multilingual spaces and really change the English dominant narrative and practices. And now I'll pass it over back to Aley. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Welcome, good afternoon. I guess if you're on the East Coast, it's pretty much afternoon across most of the United States right now. I don't know if people are joining from other parts of the world. So my name is Aley Kent. I am a consultant on this Cultivemos project. I'm very happy to be here. I have about a 20-year background of working in the sort of food access and agricultural viability world, and doing a lot of farmer organizing and organizing with communities in urban areas, working on food justice. And through all of that work, just sort of getting some training, but also experiencing firsthand, coming to a realization about the importance of good group, of being able to work well with groups, facilitating conversation, and facilitating collaboration, because all of us have to do this in our work for it to be powerful. So today, I'm going to be talking about facilitative leadership. This is the first of a 3-part series where we will have a chance to think about how facilitative leadership differs from maybe some types of leadership that we're more familiar with. We'll talk about some tools about, that maybe we can apply to our work with groups. And we'll be able to, get it, think a little deeper about how what all of us bring to the table, and what we sort of, base our practices on, and also think through like what might be, more effective ways of doing our work. So without further ado, I'm going to get into our next slide. Okay, so what I would like all of you to do, we are going to be getting into groups. You will be placed into a group based on language. You will be in either a monolingual breakout group, or you will remain in this room where you will have the opportunity to be in a multilingual setting. And your job for 10 minutes as your small group is to talk about a leader think about a leader, either living or deceased, that you admire. And so what you need to do in your small groups is introduce yourself, share about the leader you admire, and talk about what you think makes them a good leader.
This is Leslie. All the groups should be back.
They're all back now. Okay, great. I know for some reason it's hard for me to see with everything going on my screen right now. So thank you very much. You're being a great leader. So a lot of people, so we had a nice conversation in our group. There were a lot of qualities of leadership that came out, and everything from you know, people overcoming great hardship or being brave, you know, people that are supportive, and people that are able to express things that are difficult to say, or being very inclusive and making space for others, and being honorable. Would anyone else like to share any leadership qualities that they talked about or that they heard in their groups? And yes, please remember to reselect your language channel if you're coming back. What were some of the other qualities that came up in your groups? You could either type it in the chat or you can just unmute and share.
Habla Leslie, parece que Connie tenía su mano levantada.
This is Leslie. It looks like Connie had their hand up. Hello, this is Connie. We were talking a lot about our grandparents and how they worked very hard despite not having a formal education, and it is because of them that we are here.
Lovely. Thank you. Anyone else? Things in the chat. Presence and attention, not conflict avoidant, willing to dig into difficult work. Good listening and advocacy, commitment to and a passion for a cause are qualities that people recognized. So yeah, I mean, many people, and I think you all are getting at this a bit right now, but many people with leadership qualities do not see themselves as leaders, or may not always be called a leader. And you know, yet they show leadership. And so, you know, it's our challenge is to, you know, think about how people who do not have defined roles can demonstrate leadership, and how, you know, even all of us, if we don't have a defined leadership role, we can also demonstrate leadership. Any other thoughts? I mean, how might leadership roles vary from time to time?
Hey all, this is Shelby speaking. I think leadership roles vary all the time in each situation, depending on the person and the environment that they're in. For example, we might have some more leaders who are more involved in our personal lives. I think Connie mentioned grandparents being part of those leaders. And then we might have leaders at work where it's a little bit more formalized. So we've got supervisors, directors, et cetera, et cetera. And then we've also just got leaders out in the world. So people who are creating their own stories, making their own pathways, breaking cycles, things of that nature.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. All right, well, let's move to the next slide and we'll dig into this a little more. So think of a situation where you are a leader. I want you to think about what backgrounds or learned mindsets might we carry? What types of behaviors or products are favored in our work? And how does all this either align or clash with some of these qualities of good leadership that we just talked about? Talked about all these different, people brought up a lot of different qualities of good leadership. And how might that fit together or clash with some of our learned mindsets or different things that we have to deliver, or things that are sort of favored or looked upon, you know, with a good eye. So I invite you to, again, just comment in the full group, or you can write in the chat some of your answers, your thoughts on these questions. And as you all are thinking, I'm going to say a few more things. So a lot of time, I think a lot of what we find in our world, especially with formalized leaders, that a lot of what, you know, a lot of our learned mindsets or backgrounds are structures that are built on white supremacy, whether it's, you know, something from like self-importance to a white savior complex. There's a lot of capitalistic and masculine grant processes, you know, with everything being measured in numbers, returns on investment, you know, unrealistic timelines, not honoring qualities of reflection, sharing, cooperation, right? Or just bureaucracy, you know, quantity over quality, not accounting for, you know, relationship building or some of these other things that are really important in the process of development and building communities and doing the important things that we're trying to do. Also, you know, people bring a lot of other backgrounds, right? Their education, the resources, right? Their time, other resources to do this work. And also, you know, ego plays a big role too, right? You know, it feels good to be in charge. You want to get recognition, you know, claiming success for something, or even sort of moving up, or frankly, you just like income stability, right? Having something like that. Yeah, and here, so Gabby has her hand up.
No, it's okay. I passed. Thank you.
You passed? Okay. Yeah, so what other types of behaviors or products are sort of favored or might run into, might clash with some of these qualities of leadership that we want to see more of? So Shelby's saying compassion, empathy, dignity, courage, resiliency. Those are qualities of leadership, yeah? Or are these some of your own reflections on some of the things that you bring to your leadership, or that you would hope to nurture in your own leadership? Yeah, you try to bring these with you, yeah. Mindful communication, more qualities people think are important in leaders. Okay. So there's no other hands at the moment. Oh, here, polydecisiveness seems like a favored quality, but it clashes with collaboration and flexibility. Yeah. I live with the tension between trying to hold space for a range of perspectives and being informed by them while also offering and leading from a clear and assertive vision. I'll give another minute or two if people want to write more. I know sometimes it's easier to think in silence. All right, well, I'm going to move on. But if you have further thoughts, please go ahead and put them in the chat. So let's advance the slides twice, and we're going to do a language. Let's go ahead and do a language liberation break. We'll take 1 minute. We can go back. Let's take a minute and take a break. Our interpreters have been interpreting me and others for about 40 minutes now. Give them a break. Okay. Let's move to the next slide. All right, so as we're getting into here, and I think some of you are already saying, our images of people determine our leadership roles, or maybe this is another sort of take on this, right? So if you bring a background of how you think about people, or how you think about the members of your group or the people that you are leading, right? Your images of who those people are determine the role that you play or that you define for yourself, right? So if what this is just sort of laying out here, right, going sort of down this continuum, if we see people as objects, then we are the subject. If we see them as beneficiaries, then we deliver services. If we see people as participants, we include their input and fill needs. And then we get a little bit further down and we say, okay, if we see these people that we're leading as partners, then we can facilitate their process. And if we see them as self-developers, we make space. So we still have a role, but our role shifts. Our role shifts from being something this is really centered on us as a leader and having to have all the answers and having to provide everything, and being the one responsible and in charge, to being someone who is holding space and making room. So next slide. So I'm going to go through a couple of things here. So a lot of us are familiar with a hierarchical leadership structure, right? Where you have a person at the top who has people under them, and those people have people under them. And so all decisions, tend to have to go down a chain or in a certain, through a particular protocol where there is a hierarchy of who can make decisions and who takes charge. So what I want to do on the next couple of slides is compare what happens with a hierarchical leader versus what I am going to start calling a facilitative leader. So a hierarchical leader, again, sort of assumes this top-down authority, whereas a facilitative leader assumes the power of the group's diversity. That's what they're basing their decisions on. Next slide. And a hierarchical leader is supposed to know what to do, whereas a facilitative leader knows methods and tools to, again, help a group to get to the place where they need to get to. Next slide. A hierarchical leader seeks the right decision, usually one decision, right? On a project, this, decisiveness that someone brought up earlier, whereas a facilitative leader is, you're seeking committed people and you're seeking decisions that the group will own and implement. You may not come to a meeting. In fact, very often you do not come to a meeting knowing what the right decision is, but what you are interested in is a decision that the group is going to actually be able to implement and use and be useful to them. So that's the difference. Next. And then finally, a hierarchical leader relies on their individual ability, their charisma, their experience, again, to know all the right decisions and to be able to, delegate all of that responsibility. You want to feel like you have that experience and you want to be able to get people on your side easily with your charisma. A facilitative leader is relying on the group's ability for any kind of action that happens, right? They're relying on the members of the group to see themselves as able to do things and inspired to act. All right, so I think the next slide sort of sums all of these up. Yeah. So, facilitative leaders, switching between some screens here, I just want to make sure I'm talking about the same thing. So facilitative leaders, they're supporting, they're supporting the groups they lead to make decisions. They're supporting the groups to implement plans and be proactive and take on leadership roles of their own. So, simply facilitative leadership centers the group rather than centering the leader, right? And centering the leader is, again, having to have all the answers. As we are already recognizing, facilitative leadership is a model that's often fundamentally in opposition to one that we've inherited, to a model we've inherited. We tend to have more experience with hierarchical leadership, and so have a lot of the people that we lead. So it's something to remember, what people's expectations are when you walk into a room. So sometimes obviously this whole presentation is around facilitative leadership and helping people think about a different way of leading. But a lot of that doesn't happen overnight. It is a slow process where you start to learn some of your own skills, and also the group that you're leading starts to see a different way of working as well. And so right? All people are different. And in our next webinar in 2 weeks, we're going to actually be talking about sort of the experiences that everybody brings to a group and to decision making, which can complicate things, as I'm sure you are all familiar with. I think about facilitators and facilitative leaders. I think of it, someone said once, they're like, oh, it's like the midwife of a group, where, you know, the group has something it needs to do. The group has an idea it needs to put forward, or a project or a plan it needs to complete. And a facilitator is, you know, critical to that process. The midwife is critical to helping, you know, through that birth process. But it's not about them. It's about the group. So we can move to the next slide. All right, so here it's just, there are, you know, there's two key tenets of facilitative leadership. One is profound respect. So honoring each individual equally and trusting that both the individuals and the group are capable of doing what they've set out to do. And then the first one here is inclusive participation, right? Making sure every voice is heard and that every insight is given an opportunity to be considered, and that no perspectives are allowed to dominate, which I think is really key, because sometimes we like to open up the conversation to the whole group, and there's a couple of perspectives that end up dominating because those are the most vocal people in the room. And so it's just as important to get more people to participate as it is to help people step back a bit. So these are all skills that are learned. So, but I mean, as you know, I think a lot of people who started to take on more of a facilitation role have seen that, you know, good for facilitation really can foster more involvement, more community involvement, can nurture new leaders. It really focuses on the experience and knowledge that's in the room, and, you know, can really create realistic and attainable action plans. Just quickly, what are some phrases or words here that stand out to you? Dominate. Loud. Todas las voces.
All of the voices.
Thank you. Capable, tiene capaz. Great. So we can go to the next slide. So I always have to put this up because if you speak Spanish, facil makes a lot of sense. Facilitar, right? Facilitate means make easy. Is right. So again, like if you think of it as the midwife, right? You know, you're making something easier to happen, right? But facilitating groups is often not easier. Like if you are in that role as a facilitator or a facilitative leader, as opposed to a hierarchical leader, it's actually much harder to facilitate a group than it is to simply come in and, you know, direct and say that, okay, this is what has to get done. How are we going to do it? Okay, you do that part, you do that part, right? Which can be very efficient, but it may not be as effective, and it also may not be as effective in the long term in terms of group, just, group attitude and buy-in, and, and keeping the project going, and having the project be implemented in a way that makes sense for the most people. Anyway, but so facilitating groups is not, it's not just question and answer. It's, not getting lost in just everybody talking in the room. And it's also not magic. There are tools that you can use, but it's also not unplanned. And so people, you do need to put in some planning before you go to a meeting. So again, I'd love to just see some comments in the chat, or if people want to speak up. What are some benefits you feel at this point, do you feel, of facilitative leadership? Like, thinking of your own groups that you work in, what might be some benefits? For improving your own facilitation skills. Division of responsibilities. Yeah, it can become a bit more equitable. Diversity of individuals and their life skills. Yep, bringing all these different experiences to be valued and part of the plan, part of the group's plan. Broader perspectives. And what might be some key challenges to a facilitative leadership approach? Another benefit here: shared decisions and building trust and connection. I think all of these make a lot of sense. What are some challenges to facilitative leadership? What seems hard or scary? Takes longer, sure. Participation and openness time. I'm reading that, Karen, as the time that goes into allowing for all that participation. Tell me if I'm wrong there. Having too many chiefs in the group. Inspiring others as a challenge, like really wanting to get people to participate. Maybe it's hard to do that. How do I do that? Yeah. Connie, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think like something that's difficult is like opening up that space and giving folks the opportunity to do real talk, and then opening up the space to like potentially having disappointing answers, because there may be especially when like talking about race and culture, like it like having an open facilitation space lets everyone talk about what they value and what they need, and maybe the organization or the groups that are working together don't have the capacity, or they're just taking a different route. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that sometimes it just raises up the heat, and then you need to know what to do with that.
Yeah, and I think that can be absolutely very scary. Sometimes you don't know what you're going to get if you open up a conversation. And that is, I think, where some of these sort of tools and methods come in, and the planning ahead of your meeting, to be mindful of, what question do I, really, should I ask to make sure, this conversation is going to be productive. Or, if some of these things come up, what do we do with that? So it's, so yeah, that's totally valid though. Thank you for sharing. Other folks are talking about differences in learning styles, experiences, and habits. Navigating conflict, lack of shared values is a concern, is a worry. Yeah, absolutely. Like, we don't know if we're all on the same page here. So how do we know to move forward? And that's actually springboarding us really well into the next part of this. So thank you, Ariel, for bringing that up. Let's actually go to the next slide. Somebody drew this picture years ago, and I took a picture of it, and I use it all the time because I think it's a really good way to, it's a good metaphor. Gardens are a great metaphor for facilitation, again, because you can think about, I think a lot about sort of conventional agriculture versus more organic agriculture. And, you can push, you can, make plants grow, you can add fertilizer, and you can, do things that are focused on the plants and getting productivity and yield. But after a while, if you continue to only focus on the plants, the soil is not going to be healthy anymore. And so it is with groups, right? If you are constantly focused on trying to get a product out and push people to produce things and just get things done, and not focus on the members of the group or the process by which these decisions or these activities are happening, after a while there's burnout in the group too, right? So organic gardeners focus much more on the soil. Let's nurture the soil, and that's going to make the plants happen, rather than just focusing on the plants themselves. So it's just sort of another way to think about these two different leadership styles of sort of more a more hierarchical model versus a more facilitative model. Is it ever a when would you not want to use facilitation in a group meeting? Is there ever a time that you might not want to choose a more facilitative approach?
Quizás
Okay.
cuando las reuniones son
Maybe when the meetings are more social, when the meetings are more social and not so much for work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. when teaching teens. That's funny, just because it would be too much of a lost in the whirlwind kind of experience. Is that why?
This is Evan. Having taught high school special education for 4 years, yeah, we're having a hard enough time staying in our seat and remembering to eat lunch when we're a 16-year-old boy, let alone being able to be facilitated.
Right. Well, and I mean, the only reason I would push back on that is to just say, like, there might be different ways of facilitating without being too structured, but still giving those teens the sort of autonomy and the tools to be able to actually, like, you know, do what they need to do. But yeah, that's absolutely. Emergency situations, maybe, yeah. When a group is self-managing, I mean, that's really beautiful. If a group is self-managing in a productive way, they probably have, you know, systems and processes that make sense for them. And so, yeah, like, no reason to buck that or try to change it. Emergency situations, that actually brings me to something that came to my mind, and why I asked the question was, you don't want to try to facilitate something if you already know what the answer is going to be. Like, if you've already gotten some kind of decision from leadership or something, right? Some command that something has to go a certain way, then you don't want to take a group through some kind of facilitated process, because then all you've done is just basically manipulated that group into thinking that they have input, when really it was never about their input at all. So just something we talk about facilitation in some of our, you know, facilitative leadership circles, and so it's something to just remember. Don't get people together to take all this time and make a decision if it doesn't really make a difference anyway. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about groups. So we've talked about how a facilitative leader centers the needs of a group. So what are the needs of a group? So this guy, Jack Gibb, he was a sociologist who looked at the relationship between interpersonal trust and the functioning of groups that, you know, that people shared. And he basically identified 4 basic group needs. So these 4 needs are mutual acceptance, right? The group members need to have mutual acceptance. Number 2, group members need to understand, they need to share a clear purpose and have shared goals. Number 3, there needs to be effective information sharing in that group and among group members. And 4, there needs to be some organized operations and structure that people know how to follow, they know how to participate, or how decisions are made, or what, you know, what the processes are, so that they can actually function well in that environment. So just before we get into talking about some of the roles of leaders in these 4 areas, reflect for a minute on your own groups that you're part of. And you could just put a number in the chat. Which needs are being met in your group? 1, 2, 3, 4. In the group that you're in, if you're thinking a group that you're a part of, which of these needs are being met? See a lot of threes. Couple of ones. Okay, so stop. And now type in which of these needs could use some work in your group. Just put a number. All right. All right. It's good to kind of sort of think about this a little bit, because we're going to jump into thinking a bit more now about the roles of a facilitative leader. We're going to have another small group discussion. And actually, hang on just 1 second. Yeah, okay. Well, let's take, so are we on the next slide? We're a little bit ahead of time, which is great. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah. So these are the same group of needs from the previous slide, but I just squished them a little bit more. And what I'd like you to do is, yeah, and Leslie's reminding us, please put a 1, 2, or 3 in front of your name, depending on if you are Spanish dominant, English dominant, or bilingual. And we can make sure you're in a group where you can communicate fully. So what you will do in your small groups is talk about this question. If a facilitative leader is supposed to center the group, what might be some key roles and responsibilities? And so when we're talking about key roles and responsibilities, this is for, for all 4 of these things. And what we may need to do, you know what I'm going to do right now? I'm going to put these in the chat, because you may need to grab them yourself to have them when you go into your room, because I don't think you can see the I don't think you can see the main screen when you go into your breakout rooms. So here you are, everyone. Maybe take that with you, or paste it, copy it and paste it somewhere on a notepad or on a Word document or something. So you make sure you have it. Karen's asking, what do I mean by center the group? It's basically, you're making, as a facilitative leader, you make the operations and the purpose of the group about what the group needs, as opposed to whatever you as the leader feel like needs to happen, is sort of what, right? It's like, it's not about you, the leader, it's about the group, right? So making it about the group. So if the facilitative leader is supposed to center the group, right? And we're talking about these needs of a group, these 4 needs that a group has. What are some key roles and responsibilities that a leader needs to do to meet basically, in other words, what are some things that a leader needs to do to meet these 4 needs of a group? Yeah, I want to make sure everybody understands the question, because otherwise. Yeah, I'll write it right here. What are some things that I'm sorry, I did not translate that. I'm hoping that our translation team, our language justice team, could translate that. So what are some things that a leader needs to do to make sure these 4 needs are met in your small groups? Okay, so now what I'm hoping is that, Leslie, are we ready to go into groups?
This is Leslie. We are ready to get into groups.
Okay, so you'll be given about 10 minutes to discuss these. You know what, let's give them like, take 12 minutes. We'll see how, we'll do a little check-in. All right. All right, so who do we have here? Shelby, Emma, Aviva, and Piedad. All right. So I'm not going to do much talking because I've been doing a lot of talking, and I'm going to talk about this after. So I'm going to actually go on mute and let all of you.
Buenas tardes, soy Emma. Emma will be, I'm dominant English. I'm not sure I did the numbering right, but nice to be with you all. Sorry to join a little bit late. I'll just do an intro. I won't get into the meat of it.
Hola, I'm Aviva. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with Young Farmers. I think to kind of to achieve these kind of 4 different qualities, I think I start with some tone setting in meetings to kind of build a little bit of that trust and try to have an icebreaker that reminds us that we're human and build that trust. And then up top at the meeting, really start by communicating what the goals are and what we're trying to accomplish. Mike, we're in the room together alone, or if
Oh,
there
is it just one of us? I was wondering. Okay, sorry, I didn't want to take up too much air, but actually that does. I think that is one of the core things that a leader needs to do is make sure there is the space for people to open up, even if they're not necessarily extroverted. Sometimes it does require a longer pause, but in this case, that was an empty room. So sorry to leave you hanging, Aviva.
No worries.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I hadn't really heard the 4 needs framework. It seems like there would be other things that are not covered, but I like the framework, the mutual acceptance. It was intriguing that so many people were like, what's missing is organized operations and structure. I was a little surprised by that, but it's nice that everyone feels a lot of mutual acceptance in this space.
Mm-hmm.
Hola, Leslie. Creo que
Gracias. Yes, this is Leslie. I think that having a clear and organized objectives at the beginning of a meeting is super important for folks to be on the same page around what is the purpose of this meeting. For example, in the half hour that we're meeting, we want to have this or we want to know this and that.
Got it.
Yes, on the same page.
Pero, yeah, no comprendo todo de tu statement, pero lo mismo página es muy importante.
Yeah, not all of your statement, but this thing about being on the same page feels very important.
This is Leslie. I'm a little confused on the mutual acceptance. Do you have any insight on that?
To me, mutual acceptance is a little bit of the trust building. And that I think is necessary for, especially when facilitating conversations about really difficult subjects. And even like giving folks the space to kind of share what they're bringing to the meeting, whether that's like their experience or perspective or values that they're bringing to this, either whether it's one meeting or like a space or a ongoing series of meetings.
I was thinking also, accepting each other as members of the group. I know that can be a big part of the process is who's at the table. So I think it's also a part of like self-defining the group. Like, okay, everyone that's here kind of belongs here. What were you thinking about it, Leslie?
No, yeah, this is Leslie. That's super helpful. I don't know. I think I was like off with that one. Because to me, I don't know, I was thinking about it with the clear purpose sort of part, but like there's like a big difference there where like, we're going into this meeting and we know who's here and what we all accept what the purpose of this meeting, the title of this meeting is to learn about facilitation, for instance.
This is Angel. I also am thinking like about how like within Cultivemos we have like the like group agreements that everyone has to sign and our values that we all have to agree to. So to me, that also kind of falls under mutual acceptance. Like we are like not only like ideally accepting each other, but we're all like mutually agreeing to these guidelines in order to like keep each other safe. So I think that, and like thinking about the way that we structure things in Cultivemos, that like we have, like people are not, like it is a requirement to agree to these things in order to participate, in order to get paid, and like order to be a part of this network. And that like is that first need, is to like, yeah, like opt in to this, like, yeah, these agreements.
For the like making sure that the need for mutual acceptance is met, you might have asked, do you guys do like, how formal are the agreements, like how regular are the check-ins? Because I feel like that can be a big shift in like how present it feels.
This is Angel. I mean, I think that it's ever changing and ever growing, but like right now it's emphasized really heavily up front. But it is also like a tool that we reference in moments of conflict or tension or disagreement. And like yeah, but I think that there are moments though in which like we like are confronted with like, you know, maybe the realization that someone like did sign these things and like supposedly agree to them, but they're like not actually upholding them. But then that gives us like really clear context and like clear language to talk about like where there is misalignment. But, you know, I think that part is a work in progress.
Habla Leslie, creo que lo que se refiere Ángel.
This is Leslie, and I think what Angel is referring to is the community agreements, which are signed one time, and we've tried to use it as a resource, but in reality, it hasn't happened that much because everything is happening very quickly. But our values are something that at the beginning of every meeting we try to speak to our values that we have in Cultivemos, and in that way try to presence that value throughout the meeting. And we haven't gotten super creative about the way that we ask questions about our values. We try to get really creative so that folks can feel like they can feel responsible for that value in that meeting. And recently we've also been doing that in the meetings for team meetings in Cultivemos and Young Farmers, with the Young Farmers values, which are many more. But we also should look for ways to see some of this in the meetings at the beginning.
Right. I think the other rooms are going to be coming back pretty soon. You guys come up with any good thoughts? Or just more confusion?
I think we had some good thoughts. Leslie was just saying something beautiful about the like people feeling responsible for the values. we talked about kind of agreements that people make and how explicit they need to be.
Oh, cool. So like under number 1. Yeah. All right. Are folks coming back now? Okay, I think we're all here. Yeah, everybody's coming back in. All right. Please select your interpretation channel again if you're just rejoining.
Habla Leslie. Por favor, recuerden
This is
seleccionar.
Leslie. Please remember to select your language channel.
Great. Okay, and so I hope all of you had some a couple of enlightening discussions, or maybe have a couple of fresh questions. Let's go to the next slide and let's take this apart a little bit. Or maybe we'll hear some examples. So, in mutual acceptance and this need, right? This first need. Some of the roles and responsibilities might be to build community, might be to identify group norms or nurture a safe space, encourage diversity in values, ideas, and opinions. Did anyone talk about any examples that they've seen of doing any of these types of things? Either that you've done yourself or that you've seen done well?
Hey, this is Katie. I was in a group with Polly and we had a great discussion, and I shared one of the things that I've seen that was very effective was through a program called the Data Leaders Academy. So they brought together a bunch of different staff from nonprofits to talk about data equity. And basically our entire first session of an hour and a half, we spent doing the kind of identifying norms. They called them guiding principles. So we went through what their mission is as, you know, them being the facilitators, but then also as a group, how do we translate that and what norms do we want to follow? And it actually set us up really well for dealing with maybe some uncomfortable statements later, or just things that, you know, weren't the easiest that came up, but because we were all rooted in those principles and we understood each other, it made it really easy to move forward. So I was very impressed with that program.
Any other thoughts? Thank you for sharing. Other examples here? I've been saying icebreakers and check-ins. Do you mean check-ins like sort of personal check-ins? Like, how are you doing? What's going well in your life? What's hard? Things like that?
Evan, yeah. My teams at work are really good about, I feel, starting meetings with that. And then also check-ins if it's an extra long meeting of just, do we need a 5-minute like biological need break, you know, go get a snack, go use the bathroom, get some water. Just respecting people's emotional and physical needs.
Okay, great. Thank you for elaborating. Any other examples that people have seen in nurturing a safe space or encouraging diversity?
I have something to add. This is Lisa.
Yeah.
Yes, in our group, one of the things that I like to do when we start out our cohort is I like to start out with a moment of gratitude. That way, you know, we're going into the meeting in a positive way, you know, so we start off that way, and you know, it really gives us the time to share with each other what we're thankful for, you know, from the previous week since the last time we met. And I find that, you know, starting out that way, it really, you know, when people talk about something that they're thankful for, or they're blessed about, or they're grateful for, then it sets the tone for the whole meeting. So that's something that we do in our land access cohort. So I just wanted to share with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's go to the next slide. So need number 2, you know, shared purpose and goals, or a clear purpose and goals. So some of the sort of responsibilities in that case, right, are assisting the group to identify a shared vision, building consensus on why we're here and what we do, and also helping members of the group connect their lives to the bigger picture are sort of three responsibilities. Are there any other responsibilities people thought of, or any examples that came up as you talked about how to do this, how to meet this need? Anything you've seen someone do really well? Or do you find that in the spaces that you're in, that these things are sort of assumed? We all assume we know why we're here. We're all taking on some vision. We don't know if it's ours or not.
Habla Leslie, algunas veces antes de
This is
una
Leslie. Sometimes before a meeting, the leader can send an email that explains very well the different purposes and objectives of a meeting so that the people can arrive prepared to the meeting. And I love that.
That's great. Yeah, and also, so there's and that's actually a good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because there's the purpose of the group, like why are we here right now today, and there's also like the purpose of the group, like why do we exist, why are we working together at all? And you know, those are both important things to know. Has anyone ever been part of a values identification session or a, you know, visioning meeting?
I don't know what a values identification meeting is.
Yeah, I mean, if it's like sometimes it can, and we can, you know, we could talk about this if you want at a future training, but sometimes you can ask people literally like, well, what's important to you? And have people talk to each other about what's important to them and what brings them here. And then through that process, you can understand sort of the main themes of what are bringing people together, and what is important to them about, you know, maybe what the group does, but also about how the group is, and how people are with each other. That can happen through, you know, asking having people sort of ask each other questions, interview each other, and then sort of writing down themes, or, you know, talking about the themes they heard, and then the facilitator can help to bring those things all together and say, and you reflect that back to the group. these seem to be the types of themes that everyone is talking about, are these sort of our shared values that we want to remember to come back to, especially maybe when when conflict does arise or confusion arises, right? It's like, wait, we all do believe in these things together. So how can this help us maybe move through this place? Lisa saying, I worked for the Department of the Army. We had these, yeah. People do establish things like that, and also same thing with like a shared vision, right? You can have a session where you people can even close their eyes and say, okay, I'm going to picture myself being here in 5 years, and what do I see, right? What are people doing? What's going on in our community? And then again, same process, talk about it and like try to pull out from those conversations the themes that are coming up, or the themes that different people said that seem to match up, right? It's like, oh, where we're all talking about being outside, or we're all talking about our children having things to do or something, and so that can start to turn into a vision for what the organization exists for. And then things like, clear goals or purpose can come out of maybe a strategic planning meeting, or a committee working on a mission statement or something, bringing it back to share with people and reflect back. Next slide. About communication. Yeah, so sharing information effectively is really important for groups' success also, right? So how can you do that as a leader? How can you facilitate communication? How can you cultivate a learning environment? What do we mean by that? How do we practice, can we get people to practice listening, dialogue, and constructive feedback? Those are some of the roles and responsibilities that might fall under this area. Has anybody seen any examples of these? Or done any of these things? Or have any questions about what is written here? How might you cultivate a learning environment?
This is Polly.
Yeah.
I would say one way that one might cultivate a learning environment is to ask for different people from the group to present on areas of expertise. So sort of to pass the facilitation or presentation around to other people within the group.
Yeah, that would be one great way to do that. Sure. Sometimes too, just as a leader, not assuming you know all the answers and being very upfront about that. Creating spaces where people can learn from each other, no matter what their sort of, potential role is or position is in an organization, and showing that, we all have things to learn from one another. And that value of that sort of, everyone is a learner, everyone is a as a teacher. Practice listening, dialogue, and constructive feedback. Somebody was talking about just doing check-ins. This is another thing that, you know, can kind of runs along those lines, like actually taking time to, you know, and giving some structure to how we listen to each other, encouraging, you know, teaching people about active listening, how to listen, how to, you know, what the format might be for a particular session, right? So if someone is presenting, maybe there is a structure of, you know, silence and no feedback, or then maybe some written feedback, or just acknowledgement that you're listening, rather than, you know, feeling as though you have to respond to everything. So again, like making sure that people feel, you know, heard and open. And constructive feedback is another thing that can also be taught, as far as, you know, understanding ways to give people feedback and also to receive feedback as a way to improve ourselves. And that is also a part of being in a learning environment, that, you know, we all have things that we're good at, we all have things that we're trying to grow in. So, and obviously just information sharing in general, right? Like making sure that that word is getting out about things that people need to know. So having ways or any protocols that might need to be in place, just so people are clear. What's the next slide? Number 4. Organize structure and process, organize operations, right? So what are some, you know, important roles here are, you know, cultivating meaningful participation, right? Not busy work, but meaningful participation. You really want to, you know, get people's input, and you want them to know that their input matters. And it needs to matter if you want them to give the time to give their input, going back to the facilitation point from before. Using participatory decision-making methods. You know, having ways that everybody can weigh in on something, and then either, you know, grouping ideas into, you know, some sort of consensus list, or having some kind of, you know, voting process which is understood and, you know, agreed to by everyone. Ensuring clarity of responsibilities. I mean, maybe you have to have a hierarchical structure, and as long as people understand what everybody's responsibilities are, that can really help people feel that they have their meaningful role to play, right? It doesn't necessarily mean everything has to be a flat leadership structure. It just means that, you know, people are clear on who is doing what, and that they, you know, can participate in the most meaningful way that they can. And also to model accountability as a leader, making sure that that is clear to everyone. What are some examples that you've seen of any of these things? Or questions you have about any of these things? Has everybody seen all of these things in action? Or are any of these like totally like the first time you've ever seen this thing written here? What is new? All right, I think everybody's the end of their day. So let's go to the last slide. So anyway, so I wanted to, so what we did on the next slide is just basically brought all these together so you can have them on one frame or one piece of paper if you want to print them out somewhere to remind yourself, or to think about what else you'd like to learn further. You know, if there are aspects of any one of these 4 needs that you feel like you would like to dig into more. And actually on that, we could go to the last slide, because this is where I want to tell you a little bit about what's coming up. So one big skill of being a facilitative leader is actually facilitating productive group discussions. And so in 2 weeks, I'm going to talk about a method called the focused conversation method. And it is actually a method that was developed by the Institute of Cultural Affairs, like based on the experiences of, you know, hundreds of grassroots groups around the world and processes that they'd used. So it's going to include sort of the background in psychology and why it can be difficult for many people to all stay focused around a topic. The 4 levels, there are 4 levels of processing experiences and how this applies to group discussions. We'll do a deep dive into the use of carefully thought out questions that are, you know, planned, or at least that you can pull from to shepherd a group from, you know, shared awareness to resolution. We will practice forming and using question-based agendas to facilitate discussion, and also just some tips and applications, including, you know, ways you can use this to build groups, to do collective planning, and other decision making and things like that. So that's what that will focus on October 4th. It'll be the same time of day. And then there'll be another training on November 1st. And I think, oh great, the registration link is right there. I think, Leslie, you have a poll that you can flash up, because what we want to know, now that we've sort of talked about all these needs of a group and all these sort of things that a facilitative leader can help to foster, what would you like to focus on in November? Because we can do something that's a bit more in response to what all of you are interested in learning. And Leslie, is it just they can only pick one, or can they pick more than one?
Leslie, ¿pueden elegir más de uno?
This is Leslie. They can choose more than one, I think.
Great.
Para la segunda sección he puesto el enlace.
Yeah, so to register for the next session, we've shared the link in the chat. Please register again for the second section, or the second session, and we'll share the slides and today's recording after this training.
So do vote in the poll. How much time do they have to vote?
This is Leslie. I can close the vote whenever I want. Or you want.
Okay. If there's any other, I guess, requests or thoughts that people have for the next session, then please don't be shy to put them in the chat. Or if you have further, and any further questions on things you saw today, I do have a few more minutes right now. I could answer any general questions while people are in the poll. Or to clarify anything that's in the poll, if you have a question about what those choices are.
This is Leslie. Want to give gratitude for Aley for being here today, our amazing language justice team. all of my lovely coworkers at National Young Farmers Coalition, my awesome network members in Cultivemos and those beyond. Super, super grateful for y'all being here today. This was so much fun, Aley. I'm looking forward so much to our second and third sessions and hope that folks will be able to join us and that we can continue to record these and send these out afterward. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. So grateful for you all, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Gracias a todos.
Thank you, everyone.